Okay, hello everyone. We'll just sort of let you all trickle in there from the waiting room just before we get started for the day, or for the hour, I should say. Everyone's doing well. Here in Kingston, we actually had a little bit of rain this morning, which was quite nice. We haven't had rain in over a month, so. But anyways, welcome everyone. So maybe we'll just get started here. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on the speed of change, the strength of structure, why foundations matter more than ever. Today's webinar is brought to you by Queen's University IRC. My name is Lindsay Van Zulen. I'm the IRC Sales and Marketing Manager, and I'll be your host and moderator for this exciting session. To begin, let us acknowledge that Queens is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee First Nations territory. We make this statement in an act of reconciliation, honoring the land and Indigenous presence here, which dates back over 10,000 years. We're grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. If you're unsure of the traditional lands on which you are situated, we would encourage you to learn more about the territory. Before we dive into today's session, I'd like to just take a little bit of time here to go over some housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded, so if you do need to step away or miss any portion of today's session, please don't worry. You will receive a link to the recording within a few days. Second, we love hearing from you. So throughout the next hour together, we're actually going to be doing some quick pulse checks. During these times, our facilitator will be asking questions to get your thoughts, your comments, your feedback, and then any other additional questions that you may have as well. You can respond either in the chat feature or in the Q&A box, depending on whichever works best for you. We encourage everyone to participate, as your input really does help to make this session more interactive and engaging. Now it's my pleasure to welcome our facilitator for today's webinar, Carol Kotacka. Carol is a results-oriented leader specializing in driving strategy, performance, and transformational change in local, national, and international markets. Holding senior leadership positions in industry, her background reflects a deep understanding of the nuanced approaches different cultures and stakeholder groups require, with proven results in driving change through work that she's done in North America, Europe, the Middle East, and in South America. Her undergraduate studies include social sciences and public affairs. Postgraduate work includes strategic business leadership from the Rotman School of Management and an EMBA from the Smith School of Business here at Queen's University. At Queen's IRC, Carol leads two of our programs. Those include our Organizational Foundations program, as well as our Organizational Transformation program. So thank you for everyone for being with us here today. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Carol.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. We're very, very excited to have you. And as Lindsay mentioned, we're trying to make this as interactive as possible because we only have a brief time together. A lot of our content today is going to be a little bit of a high-level view about what we can accomplish together today, and we can dig into topics as we get to know each other. So we have an hour, and we're going to spend this time together, this hour together, exploring topics that keep many leaders awake at night. Market volatility, the ever-increasing rate of change, and how to build organizations that don't just survive change, but actually get stronger because of it. We want to make this session as interactive as possible, as Lindsay mentioned, as we want to tap into the collective brilliance of all of the people in the room, and we'll explore 5 key areas. And during that time, I'll pause intermittently and ask you some questions. And if you could pop in your thoughts, your comments, or your expanded questions that you would like to in the chat, Lindsay will be your representative and she will share them all, and we'll have a bit of a dialogue. Remember, your experiences and your perceptions are critical, so please share them with us as we go along. So your journey today, we're going to explore themes that move from reactive thinking to responsive capability. Kind of think about how to build strength through structure, not rigid bureaucracy, but adaptive frameworks that help you move with change rather than against it or try to stand still because of it. And lastly, we hope to provide some really practical insights that can be carried into your professional worlds, hopefully immediately. That's kind of the idea behind some of our conversations today. So, section one, exploring the forces driving rapid change across sectors. None of this is going to be a shock to any of you, I don't think. A tale of two organizations. Let's explore these. So, we'll start with a scenario that you might recognize. Picture this. You walk into two totally different organizations on the same day. In the first, the employees are moving with purpose. They seem to collaborate effortlessly and seem to be genuinely energized by their work. Decisions happen quickly, innovation flows naturally, and everyone seems to understand how their role connects to something bigger. You can actually feel the momentum in the pulse beat of the organization. In the second organization, teams are disconnected. They're often working in silos. Meetings will drag on without resolution, and the next time they get together, they're going to talk about the same thing. And there's a palpable sense that not everybody is rowing in the same direction. And honestly, everybody knows it. These two organizations could be companies in the same industry, the same country, the same province, similar resources, facing identical market pressures. So, what makes the difference? It's not the strategy necessarily, it's not the technology or even the talent alone. It's not any of these things alone. What is it, the difference? And so that's what we're hoping to explore a little bit here together. So, today's reality check. Change isn't something we're preparing for, it's already here. It's all around us. It's the water we're swimming in right now, and we always have been. Markets and environments are always evolving, and it has ever been thus. It is always so. The uncomfortable truth is the cost of standing still, unfortunately, today has never been higher. Markets don't and won't wait for us to catch up. We know this, we say this often, and we all have fallen into the trap of avoiding change at one time or another. Everyone does, I have, everybody is guilty of it. We're not against change in theory, just not today. It can't be today, it can't be this afternoon or this quarter because we're too busy. We're going to look at it next week, next month, next year, but it can't be today because we're very, very busy and we just need to get through this one thing. And we all know that good intentions aren't enough, though. We know that we can have the most brilliant strategy in the world, but if our organization can't adapt to change, if we can't execute that strategy around adaptation, we're really just creating expensive brochures and posters and placemats that talk about our strategy. So, the acceleration effect, I have no doubt that you felt it and you likely feel it every day. Over the last 5 years, what we're experiencing isn't just change, it's acceleration. The rate of change is faster now than ever before, and it's not likely to slow down anytime soon. If we think back to COVID, that feels like yesterday and 10 years ago at the same time. Since that time, we've seen significant fluctuations to the market. The cost of living, rapidly accelerated climate change and impacts around the world, and absolutely here in Canada, where typically we didn't really feel these changes that historically before in the past. From wildfires to flooding, we're seeing it here every day when we go outside to get in our cars. Economic conflict, social and political conflict, these are conflicts that are impacting communities, businesses, and the learning environments here at home, as definitely around the world. Whether they're happening tons of miles away, we're feeling them here, and so do our people. What does this mean for our organizations? Technology disruption cycles that once took decades are now happening in years. Market volatility is the new normal. What worked last quarter might be obsolete by next quarter, let alone what worked last year or in the last decade. Stakeholder expectations are shifting faster than ever. Customers, employees, investors, funders, everyone expects more, faster, better. This isn't a temporary phase, it's the new operating environment. So, what does this mean for our people? They're tired, they're stressed, and often feel like they can't afford to buy anything, let alone afford to take on any more work to try to pay for the incredibly high prices that chicken has now reached. Many organizations are experiencing change fatigue. Senior leaders are choosing to exit earlier. They're taking long-term historical knowledge with them, and no amount of compensation or incentivization is going to get them to stay. Industry patterns have always already been affected in many different ways, and they've also accelerated. Digital transformation isn't just accepting tech companies anymore, it's reshaping healthcare, manufacturing, financial services, definitely education, you name it. Many post-secondary institutions are really struggling still to this day about how they're going to wrap their minds around the idea of AI and what does that mean for plagiarism and concepts like authentic work. We don't know yet, and that's just the truth. Regulatory changes that once had predictable timelines are now happening overnight. where you can have your entire trade be revolutionized in a period of just a couple of days. Both shareholder and employee activism is on the rise. Union activity is mobilizing in a really significant way at the labor level and at the institutional investor level. The question isn't whether your industry is going to be disrupted, it's how to prepare when it happens. So, if we're thinking about the complexity factor, our external environment feels a lot more complex and interconnected. Ripple effects pop up in unexpected places. We're connected in many ways now more than ever before, and implications from that are sometimes bigger than we've ever realized before. The ripple effect phenomenon, small changes create big consequences in ways we often can't predict. A supply chain disruption in one region affects operations globally. A social media trend changes customer expectations overnight. Think about the flooding of the Port of Vancouver or the railway strike and the impact to supply chains that caused across the country. One social media-based cancellation, and your strongest champion becomes your biggest liability. I'm sure we can all think of a few recent examples of this. The old playbook of planning and controlling doesn't work when the system itself is constantly shifting. It's not possible to plan or predict for everything. If the last 5 years have shown us anything, it's that. External forces are evolving quickly, but so are internal. Skills gaps are accelerating faster than we can close them. The shelf life or applicability of window and technical skills is shrinking. Generational expectations are clashing. Organizations are managing 5 different generations of employees. What typically motivated their senior leaders, your traditional leader expectations, climbing the corporate ladder, etc., is not necessarily an incentive for a lot of generations of employees now. What motivates a baby boomer leader might completely miss the mark with a Gen Z leader. I've worked with organizations that literally cannot find someone who wants to be promoted. They've actually had to co-create co-leadership models because no one wanted to take around that amount of work in the organization. They don't want to work 80 hours a week. They want to live life differently. And organizations are going to have to shift to that ultimately, or they might not be able to find any new employees. So if we think about our new operating environment, we can't predict everything. We can't anticipate every potential scenario tomorrow will bring. And I'm not sure our anxiety levels could stand it if we tried. But we can build the foundation to adapt when change presents itself. Continuous adaptation is a concept, a readiness, an expectation that is a critical competency. Organizations who can do this can leverage speed as a competitive advantage, not just speed of execution, but speed of learning, speed of adaptation, speed of response. The organizations that thrive understand this. They've stopped trying to predict the future and started building the capability to respond to whatever comes when it comes. I suspect they also sleep better at night because they don't have to try to anticipate everything. Why do traditional approaches fail? In many cases, we're operating in rigid structures. All of us are in lots of different ways. Challenges made up of systems, levels of interconnectedness that defies traditional thinking. Within this, many organizations are pressed for time, the people, the skills. Leaders and teams often know what strategic shifts they need to make. They know what to do. Get your leaders into a room together and ask them the question. I guarantee you they're going to know what needs to happen. They often don't have the hands, the people power to make it happen. The idea of taking strategy and transforming it into operations is a huge and heavy lift and often an incredible amount of work. And that's why so many organizations struggle with this area, one of the many reasons. So I'm going to pause there and you'll see me looking down at my, every once in a while at my timer. I want to make sure that I'm really respectful of your time. But I want to ask some questions. What are the changes you're seeing in your world? And I'm going to ask the lovely Lindsay to join us for a moment and see if you want to share any of the changes that you're seeing right now.
Wait for some of these answers to start coming in. So please, everyone, feel free to, you can use either the chat or the Q&A box, whichever you're more comfortable with.
So anything around digital transformation, process improvement,
Yeah.
market responsiveness. Oh, here we go.
Some fiscal challenges,
Okay, significant.
accountability by stakeholders.
Being held more accountable by stakeholders, like as we were saying, seeing a lot more investor activism. There's a lot more open platform now and communication with people. They see a lot more into organizations than they did before.
We also have changes in expectations for employees.
I
Lots of
bet.
tools being offered, but they're hard to keep up with, and then to know which ones are the best ones to be using. Digital transformation, uh, a delay in HR spend for conflict resolution.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah. A resistance to change. People don't know how to adapt.
Hmm. Well, it's
Aggr-
scary.
mhm. Aggressive growth targets. Not adequately resourced to take on today's challenges. Even with the transformation of I think there are some financial and people resource issues that really do drive that change.
I'm taking notes as Lindsay is sharing some of these ideas.
Yeah. Younger people don't want to work in certain positions, such as care aides,
Mm. PSWs especially, a huge challenge hiring in that space.
budget and staffing cuts, adapting communications to new technology, lack of policies, especially when it comes to AI,
Many organizations are struggling with that.
adaptation to remote and hybrid working. Leaders aren't as responsive or aren't responding quite as quickly.
So leaders are less responsive. That's interesting.
Or they're not responding quick enough.
Yeah, fair.
Too many competing priorities. Lack of support, lack of accountability. Managers are feeling overworked. And then the last one here that we have says global economic shifts.
That's a big one.
Mhm.
Right. And so if we think about that, thank you so much for sharing those. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Lindsay, for representing the group. It's very helpful. But those are, there's so much there to unpack. And I think that regardless of the industries that we work in or the sectors that we work in, there's so many areas of commonality there. Where everybody's experiencing these paces around some of the challenges we're talking about is the lack of accountability we talked about, the lack of consistency, around AI transformation or digital transformation of any kind. No policy designation. Some organizations decide that it's outlawed. We've worked with hospitals in many spaces where no one can use AI. Well, I guarantee you everybody is, right? And so you may not know about it. So you might as well start thinking about it proactively to think about how you're going to incorporate it into your organization. I shouldn't cast a wide brush like that, but we have to think about people will adapt even if the organization doesn't in a lot of ways. The idea of remote and hybrid work. So a lot of organizations we're seeing is they can't get people to come back to the office, but they want to mandate coming back to the office. And it's interesting how we even see the idea of employee retention or employee recruitment over the last few years has evolved, that dialogue. So for example, you could think of the great resignation or the quiet resignation we were hearing about a couple of years ago, where people either didn't want to come back to the office or they were working remotely and they were working two or three jobs at the same time and no one knew about it. Or the idea that when someone mandates, public sector was mandating a back to office mandate, people were either striking or they were resigning and they were opting for jobs that they could work at minimum hybrid or totally at home altogether. And, the conversation maybe a year and a half ago was the war to talent for talent is over and talent won because it was really difficult for organizations to find employees. So it was adapting in so many different ways. But now, in a way, if you look at the dialogue, just in the corporate publications or business publications, et cetera, the conversations are more like, we can get AI to do your job, so you better get the job done. That was like in a span of 12 months. That narrative has changed. We're seeing that shift. A year ago, it was on the cover of, Maclean's and the Institute of Corporate Directors about mass union mobilization and labor strikes. So how did it shift so quickly? And how could we anticipate for that? Like we couldn't really, right? So all we can do is kind of be ready for the idea that we might need to shift in a variety of different ways. And exactly all the things that you were talking about here, all of these excellent examples are not things that we can necessarily control in our purview. We don't have control over those things every day when we get up, but we can start talking about them. We can start think about what adaptation takes. None of this stuff happens overnight, but it needs to begin the conversation at least. So thank you so much for that interactivity. We're definitely going to continue that throughout our time together today. So we'll go to our next section. So now that we've had a chance to vent about all the things that, are challenging us, and there are many more, I have no doubt. But I like to try and get all of that out. What are our frustrations and our challenges so that when we can start to getting to some concrete ideas on what we can potentially do about it. And so, in our opinion, my humble opinion, strong foundations create agility. Now that we've had a chance to think about all that stuff, how do we explore how we can build a platform for continual adaptation? Ensure the foundation of our organization allows for continual evolution as required. So, we're going to take a little moment and we're going to talk a little about science. Okay, so and the concepts of organizational development overall and how they're influenced. It might seem a little off topic, but I promise you it is absolutely related. So many organizations will build their foundations on strategy and good organizational development principles. OD, for organizational development, is a blend of a variety of sciences. It's management theory, corporate excellence theory, of course, but also neuroscience. It incorporates psychology, sociology, and equity, to name a few concepts. It's the people best piece of this, right? How do we mobilize our talent, our structures, et cetera, to optimize our performance overall? And by that, when we mean our talent, we mean our people, right? So from that perspective, if we're considering Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, when we're driving a change mandate, incorporating psychology into this space, you're launching a new org structure or an ERP system or a process improvement. And if we think about through that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I'm that change recipient, I'm likely going to ask myself, will this change impact my ability to earn a living, my food and shelter? Will it impact my social interactions, my opportunity? Am I under threat in any way? And if we think about neurosciences overall, or all the sciences combined, they teach us that the brain perceives unfairness as a physical threat. So uncertainty lights up the same stress response as physical danger. So if we could take that a step further and apply it to concepts of OD or the foundation for change, something like poor communication, which happens all the time. Poor communication during change doesn't just deflate morale, it can actually short circuit our cognitive clarity to make it so we can't even internalize the change overall. If we think about the common concept of a humanistic approach, it's not about just about being nice to people, although that's a really nice idea. It's a really good idea to be nice to people, but it's understanding how humans actually work and designing organizational systems that will align with our psychological and neurological reality as human beings. And that this means that those soft policies or soft HR policies, I'm using air quotes there, about fairness and communication, they're not soft at all. They're neurological imperatives for optimal performance of our biggest resource, which is our human resource. And the most effective organizational strategies are designed to work with the brain's natural wiring and not against it. So if we think about kind of the pillars or the principles, digging a little bit deeper into OD, it's evolving significantly over the years and will continue to do so. It's been around for almost 100 years now overall. But if we look at the major principles or pillars, it gives us a nice foundation and a frame to test our adaptive capabilities today. So if you think about systems thinking and stakeholder engagement, essentially this means everything, everywhere, and everyone all at once. The interconnectedness between markets, employees, customers, it considers our environment we're operating in, the political, economic, societal, environmental, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Action learning and data-driven decision making helps us to learn by doing things based by our decisions, learning from them, and basing our decisions on evidence rather than assumptions. Our humanistic approaches and ethical considerations remembers that as of today, who knows what tomorrow will bring, but organizations are fundamentally human systems and ensuring interventions align with our values. And together, these principles can create adaptive organizational foundations, not rigid structures that break under pressure, but they're flexible frameworks that can enable organizations to adapt to the change, begin to enjoy it a little, maybe even dance with it a little. And what we're covering today is just the surface, of course. Each of these principles has depth, tools, and methodologies that can be leveraged and experimented with in a variety of ways. And to dig into each of them a little bit deeper, If we think about systems thinking in action, this is the concept of the entire system overall. In a machine, if everything is working, you can predict exactly what will happen when you turn a gear, an on button, or an off button. In an ecosystem, everything connects to everything else in a way that you can't always predict. Change in the reward system in HR, and you might unexpectedly impact customer satisfaction scores 6 months later. Restructure one department, and ripple effects could energize or demoralize teams 3 levels away. We call this system thinking. And before we design any intervention, development intervention, we map the interconnections. We ask, what will this change touch? Who will be affected by it? What are the potential ripple effects? As always, we can't predict them all. So an adaptive system to learn and adapt as we get more information will be critical here as well. This approach is intended to prevent those frustrating situations where you solve problems only to create through new ones somewhere else in the organization, because I'm sure you have enough to do on any given day. Action learning is learning by doing, of course, reflecting and iterating all in real time. The organizations that are consistently outperform their competitors have mastered this approach. They don't just collect data, they convert experience into organizational wisdom. This creates continuous improvement capabilities. Instead of waiting for an annual strategic planning process, these organizations are constantly learning and adapting. Many organizations are still mapping out strategies for 10 years down. That's impossible. Impossible. The world will have changed 50 times over by then. What is our window to learn and evolve and adapt continually? This requires intentional design feedback systems that actually help people improve and leaders who model curiosity rather than certainty. This is how we learn and adapt. A lot of it starts with listening. What are some of our cornerstones of organizational agility? Organizations are made of people, as we've said. A humanistic approach creates environments where individuals feel valued, respected, included. What do we need to do to help our people be at their best? Concepts like psychological safety. People need to feel safe to take risks, to make mistakes, speak up about problems. Otherwise, how will we learn? How will we know as a system? We need to provide those learning systems, mechanisms that can take that learning and experience and convert it into wisdom, mistakes into capabilities, an adaptive culture. We'll dig more into culture in a minute because we know like that's a whole thing, but it is a critical component of these pieces and absolutely critical strategic clarity. Everyone needs to understand not just what we're doing, but why we are doing it and how their control contributes. What is our North Star? Why do we exist? And what is it we are trying to achieve collectively together? Painting a picture of that vision. That's why you hear so much about a leader who can paint a vision of the future, will capture the entire organization. What is in scope to achieve that North Star? What is not in scope? What will we not do? This clarity enables consistent decision making from the boardroom to the front line. Earlier on, I mentioned dancing, and we can use that metaphor to think about adaptive capacity for organizations as well. Think of a skilled dancer, a ballerina, or other dancer of different kinds, maintaining perfect balance while moving gracefully. That's what adaptive organizations do, and it's something to aspire to. Obviously, even balance requires continual work. They have core strengths that remain stable, but they can pivot without tripping or falling or losing the momentum. Building the foundation for that continual adaptation. It means transformation is not a one-time change because more will come. You're creating the capacity for ongoing evolution. Foundations with flexibility. Flexibility without foundation is chaos. Foundation without flexibility is obsolescence. It's essential that we have both. Organizations that continually outperform their competitors share one critical characteristic. They're learning machines. They don't just collect data. They leverage the collective brilliance of the organization and those within it. As I was saying, I wanted to hear a little bit from all of you today. That's exactly what organizations do all the time. What are people seeing, thinking, hearing, and feeling? They don't just adapt to change, they anticipate it. And sometimes they even create it, but they do it together and they continually learn from each other. No shock to anyone here, I am sure. Culture can help you or kill anything you try, even before you begin. You can have the most brilliant strategy in the world, but if your culture works against the strategy, it rewards the wrong behaviors. It counts the wrong things. It blames instead of learns. You are done before you even begin. Imagine trying to become more innovative while maintaining a culture that punishes failure consistently, where we know that if I make a mistake, I will likely lose my job. Now we're triggering back into the Maslow's hierarchy of needs components, and innovation is not going to thrive here. Or pursuing aggressive growth while celebrating only consensus-driven decision making. So aggressive growth requires optimal adaptation and entrepreneurial spirit. If I have to talk to 600 people before I can get a decision, that market opportunity will be gone every single time. Or aggressive growth targets, as was mentioned before, without the capacity to leverage and optimize those opportunities or the people. The culture wins every time. That's why smart organizations spend as much time designing and building their culture as they do crafting their strategy. This is a continuing, ongoing process. And so here are some questions for all of you, if you don't mind. What makes your organizations adaptable versus rigid? You can answer these questions or you can ask some of your own. Where do you see some of the strongest foundations? Where are the biggest gaps? It could be your organization, it could be something you've seen on TV, it could be anything. You've maybe somebody you read about or read a book about. And do you feel, does your culture support your strategy or does it reward different kinds of behaviors? And this is our safe space here in Las Vegas. So whatever you say here will stay here. Lindsay, I won't ask you about Queens because you're really public right now and on the spot.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Do
Just
we think
waiting.
sorry?
I was just gonna say, just waiting for some things to come through here.
Yeah. Or some of the experiences that you've had where you've seen this work well or maybe not well at all.
Okay, so shuffling or not addressing problem people is a gap.
Oh, excellent.
For adaptable versus rigid, one individual says, my organization, which is a charity, does a great job of pulling in volunteers, congruence, to support major changes on a temporary basis.
Oh, excellent.
Okay, so this one says orgs need to be selective and analytical about who's sitting around the table. If every person is not the right person, the culture fails. We've got another one here. An organization that's very hierarchical can be too rigid. Another example, too, of rigid, financial or business model that focuses on rigid KPIs, such as billable hours,
Mm.
utilization. Someone says here, train people well enough to be able to leave, but treat them well enough to not want to. I like that one.
Oh, that's great. I'm writing that down. I'm writing them all down, but that's something I definitely want to keep.
So another one for adaptable versus rigid, the use of current technology and open for employee feedback. This one's kind of very similar to it. Willingness to experiment and adjust based on the results. Adaptable. So for the adaptable, as an organization, there's a shared understanding of priorities and consistently shifting those priorities, evolving technology and organizations that value the people development. For strongest foundation, senior leadership's commitment to technology and innovation. We've got another example here for rigid organizations, those that are bureaucratic in their decision making and micromanaging. It's like tapered off for
Excellent.
now.
Okay. Thank you all so much. This is excellent. These are all great concepts, and thank you so much, Lindsay. So these are all great ideas, and I wanted to try and jot them down to maybe we can chat about them a little bit. is the idea concepts around somebody mentioned hierarchical strategies or frameworks, et cetera, or bureaucratic infrastructure. And that's a great example, right? Because if we're thinking about traditional, maybe broader public sector, government, public sector organizations, so many leaders will be tasked with the idea of they need to be innovative, and like you have to be like Google, you have to be like Apple, you have to be innovative like that. And the truth is, it's not possible, right? Because the structures around public sector institutions and corporations that are driven by profit are two different planets. There's an accountability structure of the public sector to the public, right, that doesn't exist for private sector organizations. So we have to think of other ways to be nimble. And so sometimes I think alignment on around that space is critically important. And to that point, right, the idea around bureaucratic or micromanaging, so many organizations, we have the culture and then we have the actual underlying culture that we all understand. And if there's a culture where we have to cover our backs because we know we're going to be fired if we don't, then being an innovative trailblazer is not necessarily something that's encouraged. Everyone knows that. But it's going to be incentivized. People will be publicly speaking about it all the time. And now you have just a really incredibly disengaged employee population. The idea of shifting priorities, like that's a great comment around adaptability. If we decide that we need to pivot in X direction, we need to decide what we are no longer going to do in Y direction. The idea of resources, oftentimes organizations will take on new strategies or new directions without changing anything, without stopping anything, and without getting any new resources. That's not really possible, and it really burns out your people. And the idea around making it train your people so they can leave, but make it so that people want to stay. That's a great quote. I think, all of you probably know that very well. It's great strategy. It's something we can really build upon because most people don't leave organizations because of salary, unless it's a really, really significant bump. It's really about either their direct leader, their ability to advance, their people, like how comfortable they feel, how valued they feel, and how they can contribute. And so that's such a great component. And the idea, somebody mentioned the idea of financial structures, like billable hours. And there's like many industries, who have those kind of outputs, if you will. It's consistent outputs. It has to be X amount of widgets or billable hours or lawyer hours or financial hours or whatever that looks like. And when that's the case, how can that lend to true, authentic client engagement? That's not really possible in that model, right? Because productivity is what's critical. So those things are often at war with each other. So these are all excellent examples. Really appreciate you sharing all the things that we could look at when we think about the idea of what's adaptive or what it isn't adaptive. So, key questions. We're going to explore this a little bit. And so, this is a space where we're going to say, here's some ideas and some key questions that leaders can ask. And I promise not each of the remaining sections are going to take as long as the first two did. That was our opportunity for exploration. I will be completely respectful of your time and leave some time at the end for questions or comments if you have any. And so the idea is we're thinking about our foundation overall, right? How is our foundation and how is it really? How do we have these conversations? Not just with each other, because let's be honest, we all do. We talk to each other, we talk to our colleagues, our peers, and air our frustrations. And many times we have a lot of them in common, but almost often it's very rare we'll share them necessarily with our senior leadership, or sometimes maybe senior leadership doesn't want to hear them at all. So some questions to think about. Are we building for yesterday or are we building for tomorrow? One of the largest challenges post-secondary institutions continually face is that their programs are training for students for jobs that will no longer exist by the time students graduate. And that's been true, like it's a very exceeding big challenge for either post-secondary or secondary schools, et cetera. Or you're thinking about things where you have a manufacturing organization that is still producing tools that no one is using anymore, or they won't be in the next 5 years. And so thinking about it from that space, what will it take for us to adapt successfully? What would it take? That's a much deeper question and more than we have time for on the agenda today, but it's something that is a great exploration question that you could dedicate an entire retreat to. And so culture diagnostic questions. This could be very deep as well, but I'll touch on two simple questions that could be good to talk about with any leadership team or even within a team base itself. What behaviors does our culture actually reward? And how safe is it to fail and learn here? And I suspect each department, level, team might feel a little bit differently about the answers. Some may feel it's amazing, some may feel it's not a conducive environment. And the only way we really find out how people feel about it and how the culture really is by asking the question. So, strategic agility, when we think about strategy in today's environment. So, military strategy could be a good analogy. Management teams have adopted many theories for military operations. And this is what I think we're operating in a time of what's called a VUCA environment, VUCA. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And that's what military leaders will call that kind of an environment. And traditional approaches don't work in that environment. So, two questions to consider as a beginning. How quickly can we sense and respond to change or danger? What assumptions are we no longer testing? And what do we need to reconsider testing? It's not an answer to any of the challenges you might face. It's just asking how are we going to be able to react when they come? Continuing with the VUCA theme, have we incorporated continual learning into our systems? How do we convert mistakes into capabilities? How reliable is our data? And where are our blind spots expanding? Some leadership readiness questions. All levels of leadership, both formal and informal, are we modeling the change that we want to see? And what leadership capabilities do we need to develop? So questions again for you. We're going to make it a little bit more interactive, as I said, towards the more end of the session, is what questions hit closest to home to you, and what questions are you asking that we haven't covered? What questions are you asking yourself right now?
We've got one here. It says, which behaviors will need to be reinforced, shifted, or eliminated?
Eliminated. That's a really interesting question because that's almost the most labor intensive.
What will success look like? And then how will we measure it?
That's a great space. Someone once asked the question, one of our participants saying, their staff would say, paint a picture of what done looks like. What is a vision of the future that we're trying to achieve together? Paint a picture for me so I can understand the direction we're trying to go.
Oh, we have another one here. Will our structure help or hinder this change?
And when we think about that vision of the future of success, and we marry our structure on top of that, where are the gaps?
And this one says, how will we develop, reskill, or redeploy talent to meet these new demands?
And what resistance will we have to that?
How to identify and capture relevant data as opposed to collecting everything.
Brilliant. When we think about working strategically, we want to work smart, not hard.
How can we help parties around us to see our updated roles and outputs?
Lack of visibility, I think I'm hearing from that one, right? In terms of lack of clarity externally, which can be really, I think, demotivating for a lot of people.
This person says we're budgeting for and requesting staff to take additional training, but staff are not taking advantage of these opportunities. What are we missing?
That's a great question to ask the staff, right? In many different ways.
Someone else says lack of visibility.
I wonder if it speaks to a great employee engagement question in terms of how much do you in your team feel seen, valued?
And there's one more here. It says, how will we celebrate wins and then reinforce the behaviors that support this new direction?
And what is our commitment to that? Right? Like that's a great question, right? In terms of what organizationally, from a leadership level, from a resource perspective, both in terms of budget and people power. It's a great question, right? What is our commitment to making this change in reality?
And we have one here.
Excellent.
It says, in a VUCA world, are vision and strategy exclusive to each other, complementary, or is vision more relevant because the strategy will change and evolve because of VUCA?
I think that might be a question, right? And so, in terms of which we could discuss, right? The idea, I think that's a great idea, a great point. In my humble opinion, I believe that that's why the vision is most critical. Our strategies will need to adapt, right? We need to understand why we exist so that if we have to change our strategy, right, we understand still who we are. So, for example, you would talk about the concept of, a long time ago, you'd have like the railway trains, and then railways and planes. So railways didn't adapt because they thought that everybody would want to continually buy rides on the train. No, they wanted to buy travel. And if they could find a more effective way to do that, they would take a plane. If we're thinking about, hospitals, for example, right? If their mandate is, you'll find the vision of a lot of hospitals will be the idea of um, healthier, essentially a new kind of healthcare for a healthier community. Well, that means, right, if you are committed to potentially working with your partners, the idea is that essentially the end goal is really to try to put yourself out of business to a certain extent, right? So that means you're not empire building, you're working with community to try and create a distributed level of support. And that what your strategy is could look very, very different as the needs of your populations evolve. But if the constant goal, the North Star, is a healthier community, and I'll use hospitals as an example because most of us have an idea how they work overall in general, right? That intention overall will be the North Star that guides us through everything. I hope that provides a little bit of something to think about and to chat about maybe when you return to the office. Thank you so much, Lindsay.
We just have two more. Do
Oh,
we have
great.
time?
Okay,
Okay.
absolutely. Yes, that's wonderful.
So this one says, how can we keep our boards in sync with this changing leadership landscape?
That's a great question.
And then the last one says, how to communicate vision with lower level staff. Often SRM are responsible for spreading the message through the trickle down communication, but it's often changed or not effectively communicated once it reaches those lower rungs.
Broken telephone. So those are two excellent points, and thank you for bringing them up. And thank everyone for all the excellent points that you brought up. The idea around board leadership, this is a significant challenge in a variety of different ways because in some organizations they have exceedingly strategic leadership. Others will have board members that are there for a variety of reasons that doesn't have anything to do potentially with their strategic ability or the knowledge about the sector or industry that they're operating in. So leadership are spending just as much time supporting and training the board as they are their staff, right? Which is a challenge. And what is that opportunity and that vehicle for that learning and all the systems that we're talking about to include the board as a stakeholder group, if you will, if we're thinking about our human resources from the front line all the way to the board, are they open for that same level of engagement and dialogue and feedback, right? That's a great question to ask in terms of leadership and to the board overall. Are they in this with you? And a vision around the idea of changed and broken telephone. That is a great point, and you are absolutely right. It happens all the time, especially the larger the organization, the more it happens, and especially large organizations who are trying to mobilize a change, like a merger, new vision, whatever that might look like. The idea is they're trying to leverage it through their leaders, a leader-led strategy all the way down. People usually get most of their information and they trust it the most from their most responsible leader, their boss, who they report to in a variety of different ways, their direct supervisor, whatever that looks like. And one of the biggest challenges organizations face is if that leader doesn't necessarily believe in the change or the vision of what it is that you're trying to communicate. And what can kill some of that things is the first thing they say is, I know it's awful, but we have to do it. And any opportunity to engage hearts and minds can be killed right there. So really appreciate the challenge that is existing in that kind of a context. And sometimes the only way, in my humble experience, that the only way around that is to reinforce consistent dialogue throughout the organization, both from a CEO perspective and it's equally complemented by the leaders. So the messages are being delivered from a variety of different places versus just being controlled through one vehicle. So anyway, food for thought on a couple of different things, but thank you so much for sharing those excellent ideas and those thoughts. They're incredible. I really appreciate it. And I hope you all feel like it's made this webinar a little bit richer. And so we're thinking about OD in action. right? So we're going to talk a little bit about a case study. I'll give you a quick example. It's almost 10 years old and it's picked intentionally so you can consider the landscape at the time this happened and where Airbnb is today, how much it is part of our lexicon, how many people use it, how it's used everywhere, and how it's exploded without not actually owning any real estate at all. It doesn't own a single room or a single bed. One of the most successful online situations out there. But in 2016, leadership felt the organization was not making evidence-based decisions and it needed to change, right? So they were operating subpar compared to Facebook or Dropbox or other online organizations. And they had invested significantly in data infrastructure, but only 30% of their employees were actively using it. And so many teams relied heavily on the data scientists in the organization. A lot of people didn't want to learn about how to work it. They didn't want to use it in general. So they would always go back to the data scientists, which became a huge bottleneck because now this team is overwhelmed. So again, we talk about a ripple effects at a systems level. It slowed down decision making. It impacted the individual team's ability, their adaptability, and ultimately it impacted the organization's adaptability and their market responsiveness overall. So Airbnb determined that the culture historically was a bit of a challenge, and didn't share data with employees regularly. So employees across departments had varying levels of comfort and skill with data. Silos were built in many spaces across the organization, and each silo developed their own decision-making process. So it certainly impacted consistency overall. So, as an intervention strategy, they launched the Data University, and they launched it to increase data literacy and to help democratize data across the organization, which showed significant success. And this is what worked. So, if we think about it in the concepts of our OD pillars in action or our principles overall, it was really employee-centered design. The training was tailored to all roles, not just the technical staff. It began with foundational courses, so 101 or 100 level courses were prioritized first to ensure accessibility for everyone. Later iterations, they offered immersive or department-specific training to make learning more relevant and actionable, but they began at the beginning and they took the time to build up that learning capacity over time. It was iterative learning. It was adaptable. Airbnb had tried and failed 3 times before. The fourth iteration succeeded by continually learning from past mistakes. It's not the first time, it's not the second time, but you will get there. Leadership alignment and support were consistent. Managers were expected to discuss data literacy progression with their teams. Subliminal messages, culturally, this is a mandate. We expect this learning. This isn't a change that's just going to go away. Leadership reinforced the importance of data-driven decision-making from the top and rewarded it. Distributed decision-making, empowering employees to analyze data independently, it reduced reliance on data scientists, ultimately making them more nimble. This shortened feedback loops and enabled faster, context-aware decisions. Success was tracked through systems informing improvements ongoing. They reinforced their culture of learning and transparency, which is much better for culture overall. Data University fostered a culture where learning and shared knowledge were normalized and expected. Volunteer faculty and peer-led sessions scared learning organically, totally naturally. So if we think about, here are some other examples of adaptive organizations: Netflix, Amazon, the Armed Forces, the Red Cross. They're all really, really different organizations, very different environments, stakeholders, systems. They have everything, different systems. They report to different people. They have different mandates. But what they have in common is they know how to read a situation and to adapt. So here are some thoughts at a high level I'm going to give you before we open up the floor again to you. Is some practical insights, hopefully, that will be able to give this idea. So it's based on days, but every organization is different. So let's consider it in phases. Really, it's just a cheeky way of presenting the information because some of this I know can't be done in 30, 60, 90 days. But let's say for the first phase or the first 30 days, we want to focus on assessment and quick wins. Honest conversations with your team about strengths and vulnerabilities. Look for low-hanging fruit, places where small changes can have impact. In the next 60 days, or the next phase, if you will, start building foundations, implement feedback systems, clarify decision-making processes, and begin developing the capabilities that you'll need. By the third phase, or by 90 days, of course, you'll be ready to take over the world. You should have your systems in place for ongoing adaptation, regular learning reviews, clear innovation processes, leaders who are comfortable with uncertainty. And remember, it's not a one-time project. This is about building the capacity for continuous evolution. Because once we build these pieces in that space, you can use them again and again and again. The first time is the hardest, and each time you'll learn and adapt more and more quickly. So the speed of change isn't going to slow down. Organizations that thrive will be those that build transformative adaptive capacity into their foundations, that enable response rather than rigid systems that prevent it. We're fundamentally talking about human systems, which this group understands very, very well. How people work together, learn together, and adapt together. So, three conversations maybe to have next week, tomorrow, whenever works for you. First, with your leadership team about what assumptions you're no longer testing. Second, your teams, your employees about what they're seeing that you might be missing or that what is left unsaid. Can we have an honest dialogue about that? And third, with your customers, how are their needs evolving? In a perfect world, what would they like to see? What is the optimal level of service? And how can we work together to achieve that? And two systems to start building, a way to capture and share lessons learned, and a process for rapid experimentation around new approaches. One assumption to challenge. Pick one thing your organization takes for granted and test whether it's still true. Just one. Let's begin there. Small steps, but they start building the muscle memory for a continuous adaptation. So some thoughts I'm going to leave you with here today, if we could talk about them a little bit, and then I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay, is what ideas would you like to explore more in the future? Will you do differently starting Monday? And what support would be most helpful as you build adaptive capacity? Things for you to consider today and to share with us in the future. I'll pass it over now to you, Lindsay.
It's Carol. We'll just sort of wait here for everyone to mull over some of their answers, and then please feel free to either put them in the chat or in our Q&A. So I think this one refers to what we start doing Monday. This person says, ask our team one big question. What do we do best? And then what's holding us back?
Excellent. What should we do best? It's very clear.
This says, ensure that stakeholders' input is built into your decision making.
Fantastic.
Someone else says, reading and adapting to our market's needs. Building leadership capacity at every level, not just the executive tier.
So formal and informal. They're often the most influential or the informal leaders.
Streamline or digitize processes that slow down your decision making or your ability to be innovative. Now this says pilot small changes before scaling them across the organization.
Perfect. Adapt and learn, right? That gives you a chance to test, adapt in lots of different ways and share quick wins from that. This has been an incredibly responsive group. Thank you so much for making this such a rich dialogue.
Just give it a couple more seconds here if anyone else has anything else they'd like to add.
Thank you all very much. I greatly appreciate your interactivity and your time today. And now I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Carol. I mean, this has been such an invaluable session where you've imparted some really good insights into how we can build those solid foundations for our organizations. If today's session did spark any interest in you for how to strengthen your organization's foundations, please check out our organizational foundations program that Carol, of course, is going to be leading for us this coming October. in Toronto. If that's all for today, then thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you so much for the engagement. This has been a great session, and we look forward to seeing you all at a future Queens IRC event. Bye now.